4 years, increased operating grants for schools, support for literacy and numeracy, and the largest capital program the education system has ever seen, $523 million for the 21st Century School Building Program. We will begin this year to implement our commitment to the Youth Guarantee. We are particularly concerned that this recession is seeing a fast-growing group of young people who are unemployed and not in training, and we are keen to make the changes we need to support this next generation of workers and ensure they stay connected to the world of training and employment. In law and order, we have fulfilled our election commitment to put 600 new police on the streets, and we've had to provide $385 million for extra prison capacity. As you will be aware, the budget includes significant funding over the next 4 years for an initiative to upgrade home insulation. The total funding is $323 million, of which $244 million is new money. The other comes from existing programs. This will allow more than 180,000 homes to have access to grants for insulation and clean heating. Most homeowners will be eligible for grants of up to $1,800, and those with community cards will be eligible for grants up to $3,000. Of course, this will be a significant stimulus to the building industry and will have positive environmental and health benefits. We've also continued to invest in science and technology and research. We've increased funding for the CRI Capability Fund, the Marsden Fund and Health Research. There's $190 million over the next 4 years for the Primary Growth Partnership, which will invest $70 million a year by the time it reaches its peak in 2012-13, with that $70 million matched dollar for dollar by private industry. We are committing over the next 4 years over $300 million to investment in research, science and technology. We've talked for some time about our investment in infrastructure with a strong focus on infrastructure that will lift productivity in the economy. Budget 2009 commits $7.5 billion to new capital initiatives over the next 5 budgets. And I'll just take you through some of the detail of that. $290 million for the first tranche of the broadband plan, $523 million for the school building program, an extra $1 billion over the next 3 years for state highways, $245 million for health capital spending, $125 million for new and upgraded state houses, and $50 million for the National Cycleway Network. The debt outlook we faced with the preliminary budget forecast, preliminary forecast for 2009 was unacceptable to the government. And you may recall that the forecasts for debt have changed quite dramatically. The pre-election update showed some deterioration from budget 2008. Then we had another update in December which showed further deterioration in the government's debt profile. Then the preliminary budget forecast came out worse than the worst scenario in the previous forecast. Debt would have reached a level that was the equivalent of $45,000 for every New Zealander, and that was clearly unacceptable. We did not have the choice of proceeding with no change in policy. So we've taken several significant steps in this budget. First, while we believe that lower taxes are good for the economy, and we have implemented the first half of our tax program, we have decided to defer the second and third tranches of the planned tax cuts in 2010-2011 until economic conditions permit. The tax cuts from 1 April will be maintained. New Zealanders have had tax cuts under the previous government on the 1st of October. A further tranche that we legislated immediately on becoming government on the 1st of April. That's delivered tax cuts to over 1.5 million New Zealanders. Secondly, we have suspended automatic contributions to the New Zealand Super Fund. When it was set up, the idea behind the fund was to invest budget surpluses through the fund in order to be drawn down later to support the funding, to support the government's funding position. Budget surpluses have disappeared, so we have decided to suspend those automatic contributions until we achieve surpluses. We will resume contributions when the operating balance is generating sufficient cash flow to meet those contributions. There is no long-term free lunch in this policy. Suspending contributions now means that we will need to make larger contributions when we start again. New Zealand's superannuation entitlements are locked in at 66% of the average wage from age 65. And you'll note in the budget we've made a decision to contribute $250 million this year to the Super Fund to assist in supporting capital markets and heading in the direction of greater proportion of their investments in New Zealand. Thirdly, there will be ongoing restraint in future spending increases. The new spending allowance in future budgets will be reduced from $1.45 billion this year to $1.1 billion next year, and then adjusted for inflation. Even with the measures we are taking in the budget, the operating balance before gains and losses is forecast to be in deficit by $7.7 billion in this next financial year and to peak around $9.3 billion in 2010-11. These are significant deficits, and as you will see, they could persist for up to 10 years. I think that shows the scale of the fiscal challenge that lies ahead of us. What is important is that the operating balance shows improvement, steady improvement from the next budget onwards. I now want to move to debt. This slide shows the impact of budget decisions on the outlook for gross government debt. We have maintained entitlements and increased spending on the one hand, but also significantly lowered forecast government debt on the other. As I've said, we faced unacceptable debt forecasts in the early budget projections, which could have reached 70% of GDP by 2023. Budget decisions will get our debt under control and turning down. Gross debt is now expected to reach a peak of 43% of GDP around 2016-17 and then begin declining. This is a significant achievement, but as you can see, it represents a long-term effort which will have to be maintained in order to succeed. We, of course, back our growth and productivity policies to lift our economic performance and do better than those ratios. So the budget shows that the government is absorbing much of the shock of the recession on its own balance sheet. It is cushioning the effect on New Zealanders and supporting jobs primarily by borrowing significantly to support public services entitlements and investment in infrastructure. However, we are determined that the economy will make the underlying adjustments it needs to make and emerge in better shape